Alright. Scout and I made it out to our our campsite, and we're going to spend the night out here tonight, just get away from things for a little bit. And thought I'd show you my campsite really quick here. Hey, Scout. This is the lean-to that as everybody's seen so many pictures of on my Facebook account. And there's a really important reason why I went with a lean-to. This is more of a type of shelter I use in the winter. And there's a lot of reasons I use a type of shelter like this as opposed to like a tent or a different, other sorts of shelters. But the main reason behind this is I haven't been out here in a couple of weeks, but you can see that it's fairly dry inside other than this fire pit area, because the fire pit area has been exposed to all the rain and everything. But it actually won't take me too long to dry that out. But the reason I went with a shelter like this is because in the winter, especially when we're talking about temperatures that are well below zero, in the sub-zero range, staying warm is really a priority, and a shelter like this is incredibly comfortable and capable of keeping you warm in some pretty cold temperatures. I spent the night out here and it was 6 below this winter, and I was able to keep temperatures anywhere from 60 up to 90 degrees in here, depending on how high I kept my fire going. And the reason that works so well is this the design of not only the shelter itself, but the design of the rock wall that I have here. Now, I could have used logs to build a wall. Didn't have to be rocks, but these rocks were all available, so you use what you have. And I kind of like the idea of using the stones and these large rocks, because once these things get hot from the fire, they're going to retain heat for a very long time, and they're going to radiate heat for quite a while, even after your fire goes out. But the idea is, by having this fire pit where it is and the slant wall, this lean-to the way it is, it kind of creates a pocket that traps heat, and you're able to really take advantage of that. And like I said, I was able to keep the temperatures really warm in here in some incredibly cold temperatures. Now, obviously, when you go to sleep, your fire is going to go out, and that's not going to help you too much. So when you get into temperatures that are getting into, minus 10 and below, you almost need to get up every hour or so and throw a good amount of wood on this fire to stay comfortable. And if you're with another person, then you can kind of sleep in shifts and each get a fairly decent amount of sleep while somebody stays up and maintains the fire. But all in all, it's a very efficient shelter. This shelter isn't really designed to keep out rain. When I built this shelter, it was literally snowing out, and it was the first snowfall that was going to be the sustained snowfall that stayed on the ground. But when I was building it, I tried to take advantage as much as I could of the debris on the forest floor. And if you look under this mat of pine boughs, you'll see this mat of leaves I have. It's not thick enough, so it's not adequate enough to stop rain, but it worked really well with snow. So when it comes to this summer, I'm going to really have to buff this up. And once I get this another several inches of leaves on top of this, that'll help make a mat that's almost impermeable to even heavy rain. To the location of the shelter is very important too, because it's just not hapstance that it happens to be here. I didn't just pick a spot in the woods and decide I'm going to spend 4 or 5 hours building a shelter here. So take a look around really quick, and I'll give you some reasons why I chose this spot. One is I have this rock wall here, and that opened up the resources that I needed to build my rock wall for my heat reflective wall. Another very important reason I chose this spot for a shelter is if you look around, you'll notice that there are a lot of eastern hemlocks. Eastern hemlock is just another variety of pine tree. And pine trees provide a hell of a lot of protection in the environment, from rain, snow, wind, what have you. They kind of create a canopy that's more or less like an umbrella that will protect you from some of the heavier elements. And the other reason that choosing the spot underneath all these hemlocks is good too is because when it comes to finding kindling material, the best spot, the best type of wood you're going to find is below these pine trees, or where you're going to find the driest wood in the winter is below these pine trees, because of the umbrella and the natural canopy that they create that shelters pretty much everything underneath them. So if you look at these eastern hemlock trees, a lot of these lower branches die before the upper branches do, and puts them within fairly easy reach. This is the driest wood you're going to find in the environment, guys. I mean, if it's been pouring rain out and you need to get a fire going, the best thing you can do is try to find some pine trees and get up underneath there and look for your wood, because it's less likely that they'll be as damp as stuff that's just laying on the ground. And also because these branches are still attached to the trunk of the tree, it keeps them up off of the ground and exposes them to the air currents and the wind, which helps dry them a lot faster. And because they are pine trees, these little branches still have pitch that have, even though they're dead, there's pitch that is dried in these branches. So they kind of they combust a lot easier, they go up a lot easier because of all that flammable pitch that's in these branches. So when it comes to finding kindling material, I highly recommend, finding some kind of a pine tree, or just to find shelter in general, because so much shelter can be found underneath these trees. We can even do what I did, for example, and cut these pine boughs down and use them to create a shelter with them. Or if we don't have time to do that and we just need to get out of the heavy rain, putting our back to one of these tree trunks is going to cut down the amount of weather we're exposed to. So that's another reason I chose the shelter location. I also wanted to find a spot that if I get into really, really high winds, I don't have to worry about some big dead branch coming down and crushing me. About the only thing I have near my shelter that's of any significance is probably this tree right here. But there's no real widowmakers or dead branches in it that I would have to worry about. So choosing a spot, I also wanted to put myself on top of a hill, or put myself somewhere on a south-facing slope, especially in the winter time, because I want to take advantage of the first rays of sun and take advantage of as much of the heat from the sun that I can possibly get throughout the course of my day. And this holds especially true when we're talking about extremely cold temperatures. So you want to take advantage of the sun's energy as much as possible when you choose your shelter location for winter camping. Now, another reason I chose this spot was because there's a lot of dead wood around here. Kindling, we've talked about. I'm going to get that out of these pine trees. But now when we talk about fuel, we have to talk about, we're actually talking about a bigger wood, something about the size of your arm or bigger. Because you can't rely strictly on these small branches for a fire. If you do, these things are going to burn up so fast, you would have to collect a mound of this stuff, probably as big as a tractor trailer, just to keep yourself warm enough through the night, because it's just going to burn up so fast. So you really need to find some fuel, some good sources of wood that are going to be going to allow you to make a sustained fire. And again, one of the reasons I chose this spot is because of that. So if we go through here and look around, I'm going to try to find my fuel very similar to the way I find my kindling. I'm going to look underneath the pine trees first, because they're going to be sheltered the most, again, from the rain, from the snow. And I'm also going to try to find trunks like this one here, for example, that we see laying down. This blew over, and this deadfall is, even though it's exposed to the sky, it's up off of the ground. Because it's up off of the ground, it's going to be exposed to the air currents that are moving over and under it, or the wind if you want to call it that. So it's going to dry faster than stuff that's laying down in this snow. You're never going to find perfectly dry wood in the wilderness unless it's been just an absolutely dry summer or a dry period of the summertime. You can get wet, damp wood to burn, but you need to just get a fire hot enough to get that going. And that's why I try to find all of my wood that's not laying on the ground. So I look for deadfalls, and back in here I have a lot of this stuff. Here's another example of a dead trunk that's leaning up into a tree. Now this is going to burn just fine because it's not laying on the ground. It is a little damp, but with the source of kindling that I have from these eastern hemlock trees, I won't have any problem getting hot in a fire to get that stuff going. But if we were to look around back here and I was to take you around a little more, there's just all kinds of examples of trunks that are sticking up out of the ground from trees that have died, and they've dried out in that position. All I have to do is cut them down or shove them over. Or I'm going to look for a deadfall or something similar like that to find my fuel. And again, there's a lot of that here. And that's the other reason I chose this spot. And I'm on kind of on the top of a hill, or just down from the top of a hill. So I get a lot of sunlight here throughout the day. I also needed to find a spot where I had a source of water. And if we come this direction from the shelter, you'll see that the land drops off. This is kind of a ravine down here, if you want to call it that. And at the bottom of this ravine is a brook. So I'm just a short walk from a water source. And another reason I chose this spot is because that water source is running year around. Even in the coldest temperatures, I'm able to find an open source of water while I'm out here and make it easy for me to gather water without having to chop a hole in the ice or try to melt snow. Now, the reason I didn't put my shelter right on top of the water or down there by it closer to the brook is because the lower you are in elevation, or that low spot right there forms what's called a cold sink. Colder air is going to settle in lower areas of the land, so that's something to think about. The reason I put my shelter on the top of this hill was to avoid a cold sink. Now, the temperature difference may only be a few degrees, but when we're talking about extremely cold temperatures, every little bit counts. So all these little things play into combination to make our stay out in the woods in the wintertime a little bit more pleasant. All right, well, I think that about covers it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my stuff out. I haven't had anything to eat today, so I'm going to get a fire going really quick, and Scout and I are going to have a few pieces of bacon and then probably go for a walk or something like that.